Alrighty, welcome back, my friends, to the third and final installment of this week's videos. So what I want to do is I'm going to finish or kind of not speed through the barrier islands part because I know that was like the end of the last video and it was kind of quick. And then how to differentiate between some of the secondary coastal structures that we can observe. And lastly, we'll get into beaches and different things that we see along beaches. And then we'll finish all of that up when we return in person on Thursday. So, all that said, here we go. Barrier islands. So, lots of barrier islands exist around different parts of the country. They're pretty common in the East Coast or along the East Coast. And essentially what happens is they're kind of similar to a spit or a bay mouth bar or even a tombolo, but they have enough vegetation on them that it keeps them from eroding away for the most part. So on the left here, we're looking at Texas. So we have the Galveston and Houston is right up here. And we can see how these, this kind of like line that helps protect the coast. And that's basically what these things do, which I think is really quite fascinating. Then here on the right, we're looking at North Carolina and the barrier islands that help protect the coast there. So they do exactly what the name implies. They are a barrier for the mainland regions from wave action. So barrier islands are super, super important in this region, especially for hurricanes. So it's probably best to not be on any of these barrier islands during a hurricane because you're going to get the brunt of the energy, at least the wave energy. Everyone's going to get a ton of wind and rain and stuff, but with tropical cyclones, like you're going to have a ton of wave energy from all of this built up energy as the tropical cyclone progresses its way over the ocean. So it's generally not recommended to be on barrier islands. All right, so now going into how to differentiate between all of these different secondary processes that we just talked about. So this is kind of like a little schematic to kind of be your cheat sheet in a way to tell the difference between each one. So we have the sand spit, right? It kind of has like this little curvy sort of feature to it. We have a lagoon here, which is basically the little piece of water in between what could be a sort of a sandbar or a barrier island and the actual mainland area. Here we can see the bay mouth bar and as a bay in and of itself, as well as a barrier island here, kind of out further from the mainland area, but can still do some protection. Then, of course, a beach and then a tombolo, which connects to the sea island. So one thing I don't think I really talked about in the previous video in terms of bay mouth bars and a pretty important role that humans can actually play here. So I know that we talked a long time ago when we talked about sediments, how dredging is pretty detrimental to the health of the bottom of the ocean, right? Because it's pretty destructive. But dredging can actually be a really important tool when you are trying to make sure that your river is still going to flow into the ocean without being impeded by, in this case, a bay mouth bar or any other sort of sediment or buildup there. You definitely like always want this, well, depending on the area, but a lot of places will likely want a nice direct line from the river to the oceans. That way there's not a whole lot of interference there. So that's, just wanted to mention that here. All right, so now we're going to move into beaches and the anatomy of a beach. So what we're looking at here, and a way that you will probably see a question related to this idea on a Connect homework or a Connect exam question, will be kind of labeling where different things are in this diagram. So we're going to start in the offshore area, right out here in kind of the water. What's really quite fascinating, I think, with the offshore regions is we can see in like this side view schematic that it's not just a flat bottom. Oftentimes we will see moves and grooves, right? Like hills and valleys, because sand and sediment is super malleable. And when you have all of this wave energy interacting with the bottom of the ocean, it like picks up all of this sand, right? And then you can like literally see these ever moving mountains and valleys underwater, pretty close to the shoreline, but a little bit directly offshore. Then we have, like, kind of getting closer to the land area here, we have the beach. And the beach is anywhere that includes the foreshore and the backshore. So the foreshore includes, which is just a fun word to say, by the way, but the foreshore includes kind of where the low water line would be, as well as a little bit out into the water a bit. And then the back shore is kind of the beach, like what we would think of as a beach in and of itself, like where you're going to put your little umbrella and bring your little cooler and hang out right by the water. That's what we would consider the back shore area. And what we can see here as well are these berms, which are kind of like the edge of the water, kind of where you see this sort of almost mountainous little, like mini mountain, like hill kind of thing. And we have one for the summer and one for the winter, and we'll talk about the differences between those here in just a few moments. And then lastly, we have the coastline and the coast. So this is where there's then no interaction with the water in and of itself, but it's right next to the ocean. If you remember what the definition of a coast is, it's where the water meets the land, right? So that's exactly what we see here. And in this schematic, it shows a cliff. But not all beaches have cliffs, right? A lot of the United States is not nearly as mountainous and cliffy as we are here in California. But a lot of beaches that you may go to here may have some sort of cliff. Fort Funston is a beautiful example of that, and really just a great place to go anyway. So an example that your book has, looking at the anatomy of a beach in terms of like an actual picture, is what we have here. So notice this is, I think in Florida or in Texas, where it has the Gulf of Mexico here. So notice we have the beach face, but no cliffs, right? No cliffs, but we have some trees. And then we have a term that hasn't been brought up yet. It's called a runnel. So a runnel, a way that you can maybe think about that is like a little river that almost flows between the actual body of water, and there might be almost like a sandbar that is there. Especially during something like low tide, where there's not as much water in this area, but you may indeed still see a little stream of water that is associated with the main body of water. Not like it's fresh water or anything. It's actually still part of the ocean region there. Next, I want to talk about something called dynamic equilibrium. So in these two pictures on the left, I have a summer beach profile versus the right is a winter beach profile. And you should see a pretty striking difference between the two automatically. One has a lot of sand on it. The summer beach profile has a ton of sand, whereas the winter beach profile doesn't look like it has any sand at all. It more so just looks like a whole bunch of rocks, right? Some of the rocks looking kind of green, which is just indicative of maybe some algae or some moss or seaweeds or whatever kind of covering these rocks. So what happens is in the summertime, especially in areas like here where we kind of have a wet stormy season and a dry season, where we have a ton or can have a ton of stormy activity in the wintertime, which can take away sand from the actual like visual beach area, and it can store it somewhere offshore where we can't see it. It's under the water. We can't see it with our eyeballs. But in the summertime, all of that sand gets transported back onto the physical visual beach that we would kind of think of when we say, oh, we're going to the beach, that kind of thing. And that's because there's not as much storm activity taking the sand away. And so it's allowing the deliverance of that sand back into the beach region. So being in dynamic equilibrium means that there's not a complete takeaway of the sand from that particular coastline or beach region. So in this case, this is like a schematic version of what we just saw. So the top is the summer beach profile, and on the bottom is the winter beach profile. So we can see that in the summertime, all of this sand is kind of deposited or put onto the actual the beach area itself. Whereas in the wintertime, that no longer exists. And all of this sand that was right here up on the physical beach is now stored out here off of the main kind of onshore regions, kind of more stored offshore a bit. So again, we say things are in dynamic equilibrium if there's no loss of sand in this whole process here. Next few things I want to touch on are natural processes, and these are just some more definitions to consider. The first is onshore current. So that's when we have waves, physical waves that are moving toward a beach to help produce a current in the surf zone that moves more water onshore. Whereas an onshore transport is the actual literal transport of sediment towards the shore. So the onshore current is the physical process of, or the physical like means of this transport that occurs. I was trying to think of some silly analogy to think of, but it's escaping me at the moment. Apologies. The next process here is the longshore transport. And so that's when there's wave-produced longshore current that moves sediment parallel to the shore within the surf zone. And oddly enough, this is a process that happens where there's the transport from towards the south on both the east and the west coast of the US, which I thought that was kind of an interesting little piece of information. So it's not like there's a transport towards the north on the east coast and towards the south on the west coast. It's actually, oddly enough, both, which is kind of fascinating to me, I think. So to give us a visual idea of what longshore transport is and what that means, here's a schematic for us. So basically we have this surf zone, so like where humans would kind of hang out and surf, if you will. And we can see that the waves don't come onto the shoreline perfectly parallel, right? There's a little bit of an angle here. So with that angle, we can see like this little sort of zigzaggy motion here. But overall, the sand and the sediment is being transported from the left to the right, from the north to the south, if we were to draw like a little compass kind of offset here. So if you've ever been to a beach, a pretty long beach, and you've seen kind of like this wavy pattern in how the sand is and like kind of see like these little up down movements, that's literally what, like, we believe that's kind of the longshore transport is what helps kind of show that. And that's what this picture here is trying to show. So we have these evenly spaced sort of crescent shaped depressions on the beach, and we call those cusps. We usually observe this on sand and cobble beaches in quieter coves with those longer, straighter coastlines. And how they're really formed is still a bit of a mystery. It's hard for scientists to model this, like using a computer. So we kind of understand the process, but not enough to be able to stick it into a computer and call it a day, which I think is really quite interesting. So I encourage you, next time you go to a beach, especially if it's a long beach, like the North or South Beach up in the Point Reyes area is a beautiful example, or maybe even Fort Funston or Baker Beach, where it's like those longer sort of beaches. Baker Beach would actually be, or Ocean Beach would be really nice because that is super long, kind of spreading the whole Richmond and Sunset District. But see if you can observe these. I encourage you to see if you can. All right, so when we come back together on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more about some of these things, kind of finish up this sort of longshore transport situation, and how humans can help, how we can help stabilize beach regions, and talk a little bit further about erosion and deposition and things like that. So thank you again so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Again, apologies that these are a day late from what they normally are, but I hope that you forgive me. And I'll see y'all on the flip side. Thank you so much. Bye.